The doorbell rang at exactly 7:30 a.m. on a rainy Sunday morning. Mark Wilson, still in his faded Batman pajama pants and clutching his first cup of coffee, wasn't expecting anyone. His 6-year-old daughter Lily peeked from behind his legs as he opened the door to find Katherine Chen, the intimidating CEO of his company, standing there soaking wet, a single suitcase at her feet, and tears streaming down her face. The woman who had never shown a hint of vulnerability in the boardroom now looked utterly broken. "You said I could move in with you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. "Did you mean it? If you're wondering how a joke at the company holiday party led to one of the most powerful women in tech showing up at a single dad's modest suburban home, and how it changed both their lives forever, stay with me. This story might just restore your faith in second chances. If you find yourself moved by what you're about to hear, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity." Mark Wilson had been raising his daughter Lily alone for the past 4 years, ever since his wife Sarah died in a car accident. At 35, he'd settled into a routine that revolved entirely around his daughter and his job as a mid-level software developer at TechFusion, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. Dating wasn't even on his radar. His life was a carefully balanced equation of school drop-offs, client meetings, grocery shopping, and bedtime stories. It wasn't perfect, but it was stable, and stability was what Lily needed most. Katherine Chen had built TechFusion from the ground up. At 42, she was known throughout the industry as the Ice Queen, brilliant, ruthless, and seemingly devoid of personal attachments. Business magazines featured her stern face on their covers, praising her visionary leadership while speculating about her non-existent personal life. What those magazines didn't know was that Katherine went home each night to an immaculate penthouse apartment where the silence was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. Success had given her everything except someone to share it with. Their worlds existed in parallel, intersecting only in the most professional of contexts, until the company holiday party in December 2025. Mark hadn't wanted to attend. Finding a babysitter was always a challenge, and social events made him anxious. But his team lead had insisted, saying it would be good for him to show his face to upper management. So he'd called his neighbor Mrs. Patel, who adored Lily and was always happy to watch her, and reluctantly put on his one decent suit. The party was held at an upscale hotel downtown, with an open bar and a live band. Mark stood awkwardly near the appetizer table, making occasional small talk with colleagues while counting the minutes until he could reasonably leave. He was reaching for another stuffed mushroom when Katherine Chen appeared beside him. "Not much of a party person either," she asked, surprising him with the casual tone. In their few interactions at work, she had always been formal and direct. "Is it that obvious?" Mark replied with a nervous laugh. "You've been checking your watch every 3 minutes, and you've rearranged those mushrooms twice without taking one." Mark felt his face flush. "I have a 6-year-old at home. Parties aren't really part of my skill set anymore." Something in Katherine's expression softened. "Children have a way of changing priorities." "They sure do. Lily's my whole world now." The conversation might have ended there, just another forgettable exchange at a corporate function, but the band started playing a particularly loud number, forcing them to move to a quieter corner of the room. "How do you balance it?" Katherine asked suddenly. "Work and being a single parent?" The question caught Mark off guard. The CEO of his company was asking him for life advice? Honestly? Not very gracefully. "There are days when I feel like I'm failing at both." Katherine nodded, her eyes distant. "I've been thinking a lot about balance lately." Perhaps it was the 2 glasses of wine he'd had, or the strange intimacy of standing in a dark corner while everyone else danced, but Mark found himself speaking more openly than he'd intended. "After Sarah, my wife, died, I thought I'd never figure it out. How to be everything Lily needed. But you adapt. You learn to forgive yourself for the imperfect days." "I wouldn't know where to start," Katherine admitted, and for a brief moment, Mark saw something vulnerable in her expression. "Well, you're welcome to move in with us anytime and see how the chaotic half-lives," he joked, immediately regretting the overly familiar comment. "I'm sorry, that was inappropriate." But Katherine had smiled, a real smile that transformed her usually stern face. "Careful what you offer, Wilson. I might take you up on it someday." They'd both laughed, and the conversation had moved on to safer topics. By the time Mark left the party, the exchange felt like nothing more than a pleasant interlude in an otherwise forgettable evening. He had no idea that his casual joke had planted a seed in Katherine's mind, one that would germinate over the following weeks as her carefully constructed life began to unravel. The first sign of trouble came in early January, when rumors of a hostile takeover attempt began circulating through TechFusion. Katherine had built the company with a vision of ethical technology that improved lives, but the board was increasingly focused on quarterly profits. The vultures were circling, and Katherine was fighting battles on multiple fronts. Mark was vaguely aware of the corporate drama, but it didn't directly affect his department. What he did notice was that Katherine looked more tired each time he glimpsed her in the hallways or company meetings. The confident stride had given way to a slight slump in her shoulders. Then came the news that rocked the tech world. Katherine's father, the renowned physicist Dr. Chen, had died suddenly of a heart attack. The obituaries mentioned that he was survived only by his daughter Katherine, no other family was listed. Mark remembered their conversation about balance and wondered if she had anyone to lean on during her grief. He sent a simple condolence email, not expecting a reply from someone who must be receiving hundreds of similar messages. To his surprise, she responded within hours with a brief but personal note thanking him for his kindness. What Mark didn't know, what no one at Tech Fusion knew, was that Katherine's father had been her anchor. The brilliant, gentle man had raised her alone after her mother abandoned them when Katherine was just 4 years old. He had nurtured her intelligence, encouraged her ambitions, and remained her most trusted advisor even as she built her empire. His death left her adrift for the first time in her life. The final blow came when Katherine discovered that her CFO, a man she had trusted implicitly, had been secretly working with the corporate raiders attempting to take over Tech Fusion. The betrayal was both personal and professional. In a single day, she lost control of her board, was forced to step down as CEO, and watched as her life's work was handed over to people who saw it only as an asset to be stripped and sold. Which brings us back to that rainy Sunday morning in February, when Katherine Chen stood on Mark Wilson's doorstep with nowhere else to go. "You said I could move in with you," she repeated, her voice stronger now despite the tears. "I know it was a joke, but I didn't know where else to go." Mark stood frozen for a moment, processing the surreal situation. Behind him, Lily tugged at his pajama pants. "Daddy, who's the sad lady?" That simple question broke through his shock. "This is Ms. Chen from Daddy's work," he explained, then turned back to Katherine. "Please, come in out of the rain." Katherine stepped inside, leaving a puddle on the welcome mat. Up close, Mark could see that her usually immaculate appearance was disheveled. Her hair hung in wet strands around her face, and her expensive coat was buttoned incorrectly. "I'm sorry," she said, looking around the modest living room with its mismatched furniture and scattered toys. "This is crazy. I shouldn't have come." "No, it's okay," Mark assured her, though he wasn't entirely convinced himself. "Let me get you a towel. Lily, can you show Ms. Chen where she can sit?" As Mark hurried to the linen closet, he heard his daughter's clear voice, "Do you like hot chocolate? Daddy makes the best hot chocolate when I'm sad." By the time he returned with towels and dry clothes that might fit Katherine, his daughter had already led the former CEO to their kitchen table and was solemnly explaining her collection of stuffed animals that occupied one of the chairs. "This is Mr. Whiskers," Lily was saying, holding up a well-loved cat plushie. "He helps me when I have bad dreams." Katherine was listening with complete attention, her tears subsiding as she focused on the child's chatter. She looked up when Mark entered, a mixture of embarrassment and gratitude on her face. "I promised hot chocolate," Mark said, setting down the towels and clothes. "And then maybe you can tell me what's going on." Over steaming mugs of cocoa, with extra marshmallows at Lily's insistence, Katherine explained the events of the past few weeks. The corporate takeover, her father's death, the betrayal by her CFO, and finally, the discovery that morning that her access to her penthouse had been revoked. Apparently, the apartment had been company property, a detail buried in her contract that she'd overlooked. "I have money," she clarified, wrapping her hands around the mug. "That's not the issue. But all the hotels are booked because of the tech conference this week. I tried calling a few friends, but..." She trailed off, the implication clear. The Ice Queen didn't have friends, she had business associates. "And then I remembered what you said at the party. About moving in to see how the chaotic half-lives." She gave a hollow laugh. "I know it was a joke. I can leave as soon as I find somewhere else." Mark should have been overwhelmed. His orderly life with Lily didn't have room for unexpected houseguests, especially not complicated ones like Katherine Chen. But looking at her sitting at his kitchen table in his ex-wife's old Stanford sweatshirt, with Lily showing her how to properly dunk a cookie in hot chocolate, he couldn't bring himself to turn her away. "You can stay in our guest room," he said finally. "It's really more of an office with a futon, but it's private. Stay until you figure things out." The relief on Katherine's face was palpable. "Thank you. I promise I won't be in the way." Lily, who had been listening with the selective attention of a 6-year-old, looked up brightly. "Like a sleepover? Can we make a fort?" And just like that, the strange arrangement began. The first few days were awkward, to say the least. Katherine woke before dawn, dressed in her impeccable business attire despite having nowhere to go, and tried to make herself useful by reorganizing Mark's kitchen cabinets and cleaning already clean surfaces. Mark would find her sitting rigidly at the kitchen table when he came down to make Lily's breakfast, looking like a visitor from another planet. "You don't have to do that," he told her on the third morning, when he found her ironing his work shirts. "This isn't a boarding house. You're a guest." "I need to contribute," she replied stiffly. "I can't just exist here." Mark considered her for a moment. "Have you ever made pancakes?" The question clearly caught her off guard. "No. Would you like to learn? Lily loves them on Wednesdays." That was how Katherine Chen, former CEO of a billion-dollar tech company, found herself covered in flour while a 6-year-old girl instructed her on the proper technique for flipping pancakes. The first few were disasters, misshapen, half-raw in the middle, or burned around the edges. But by the time Mark had showered and dressed for work, Katherine and Lily had produced a respectable stack of star-shaped pancakes, using a cookie cutter that Lily insisted was essential to the process. "We saved you the best ones, Daddy," Lily announced proudly. Katherine looked up from wiping flour off the counter, a streak of it still visible on her cheek. For the first time since she'd arrived, she looked relaxed. Your daughter is an excellent teacher. Something shifted that morning. Katherine stopped trying to be the perfect guest and started simply being present. She still woke early, but instead of cleaning, she began using the time to work on her laptop, drafting plans for what she might do next professionally. When Mark came home from work, he'd find her and Lily engaged in increasingly elaborate activities, building structures with Lily's blocks, creating science experiments with household items, or reading together on the couch. She knows everything, Daddy, Lily informed him seriously one evening. Even more than Google. Katherine had laughed at that, a genuine sound that Mark realized he'd never heard before the pancake morning. I don't know about that, but I do know a lot about stars. My father was an astrophysicist. What's that? Lily asked. Someone who studies the stars and planets and everything in space. Lily's eyes had widened. Can we see the stars tonight? That was how Mark found himself driving them all to a park outside the city limits at 9 p.m. on a school night, well past Lily's bedtime, with blankets and thermoses of hot chocolate in the trunk. As they lay on the grass looking up at the night sky, Katherine pointed out constellations and explained how stars were born and died, translating complex physics into stories that captivated both Lily and Mark. My father used to do this with me, Katherine said softly, after Lily had fallen asleep between them. Whenever I was upset or scared, he'd take me somewhere we could see the stars. He said it helped put problems in perspective. Did it work? Mark asked. Katherine was quiet for a long moment. Yes. But I forgot that somewhere along the way. I got so caught up in building something that would make him proud that I stopped looking at the stars. Mark turned his head to look at her profile in the darkness. I think he would be proud of who you are, not just what you built. Katherine didn't respond, but in the dim light, he could see a tear slide down her cheek. As weeks turned into a month, their unlikely household developed its own rhythm. Katherine found a temporary consulting position she could do remotely, which gave her purpose while she planned her next career move. She took over school drop-offs so Mark could get to work earlier, and he handled pickups. They alternated cooking dinner, with Katherine's initially disastrous attempts improving under Lily's earnest supervision. You have to taste it while you cook, Lily instructed her one evening, standing on a chair beside the stove. That's what Daddy says. Your daddy is a wise man, Katherine replied, sampling the pasta sauce she was making. Mark, who had been watching from the doorway, felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. The scene was so domestic, so normal, and yet nothing about their situation was normal. Katherine Chen was living in his guest room, helping raise his daughter, and somehow fitting into their lives as if she'd always been there. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Katherine still had moments of intense focus on work that made her seem distant and unreachable. Mark still had days when grief for Sarah hit him unexpectedly, making him withdraw into himself. And Lily, perceptive as children often are, sometimes tested the boundaries of their unusual arrangement. Is Ms. Katherine going to be my new mommy? She asked one night during bedtime, catching Mark completely off guard. No, sweetheart, he said carefully. Ms. Katherine is our friend who's staying with us for a while. Lily considered this. But she makes you smile like in the pictures with mommy. Mark hadn't known how to respond to that. It was true that something had changed between him and Katherine. Their late-night conversations after Lily went to bed had become the highlight of his day, discussions about books, technology, philosophy, and increasingly, their personal histories. He'd told her about meeting Sarah in college, their whirlwind romance, and the devastating day when police officers had come to his door with news of the accident. She'd shared stories of growing up with her brilliant, distracted father, her drive to prove herself in a male-dominated industry, and the loneliness that had come with success. There was an ease between them that Mark hadn't experienced with anyone since Sarah. But he wasn't ready to examine what that might mean, and Katherine had given no indication that she saw him as anything more than a generous friend. The situation came to a head in April, when Katherine received an offer to become CEO of a promising startup on the other side of the country. The opportunity was perfect, a company with values aligned with hers, a board that respected her vision, and a chance to build something meaningful again. She told Mark about it one evening after Lily was asleep, as they sat on the porch swing he'd installed the previous weekend, with her surprisingly knowledgeable assistance. It's in Boston, she said, looking out at the darkened yard rather than at him. They want me to start in 2 weeks. Mark felt as if someone had punched him in the stomach. That's great. A perfect fit for you. Yes, she agreed, still not meeting his eyes. It's exactly what I've been